In a community poll, I asked what everyone wanted me to build next, and this surprisingly came in dead last. So it made sense to build it. How about we give a win to the underdog for once? This franchise has seemed to have lasted for many decades because it nailed the balance of robots, story, and explosions. It probably also helped that the toys turned into cars, which you could launch off of a kitchen table. This is where the build starts. Soundwave in its most iconic form, the audio player that could record, spy, and shoot lasers. It's kinda wild how effective that was in the 80s. But anyway, it's a super quick build, but it nails the shape and color, and these swappable cassettes are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Next, it was time to build Laserbeak. It starts off as a cassette, just a few plates with some printed details, but once you start folding things around, it turns into a little bird with articulated wings, a shaped head, and a decent finish that actually holds together. Which is good because it's going to eventually find a home in Soundwave's chest piece. And I suppose when you live inside of a tape deck, you've got to look the part. It's not going to win any design awards, but for what it is, it's surprisingly satisfying. Especially for something that transformed from a rectangle into a laser bird, which, now that I've said it out loud, sounds way cooler than it probably should. Moving on to the other cassette bot, he builds up pretty quick and he's a bit more delicate than Laserbeak. The legs are thinner, the joints are looser, and you kind of have to balance him just right to keep the pose from collapsing in on itself. He does transform into a flat cassette again, but getting there without pieces shifting can take a few tries. Once he's standing, he's got that Jaguar pose you would expect. Head low, tail out, rockets mounted on the back. There's some articulation in the legs and the head tilts up slightly, but don't expect to do too much posing beyond a stealth crawl. He's meant to lurk in the shadows waiting for a command, and in this case, the command was fall behind a shelf and never be seen again. Now we're moving on to the star of the show. This is the front of Soundwave's torso, which includes the tape deck. He does have a working door, but for now, it's time to apply the classic play button sticker. This alone brings back lots of memories from many decades. Soundwave's whole thing is being a sentient piece of technology that ejects minions. He's quiet, robotic, and somehow cooler than half of the Autobots combined. He's also peak efficiency. No small talk, just opens his chest, says something monotone, and lets the robot animals do the work. I don't know about you, but I've never built the inner mechanics of a tape deck. It's a short section, but it's one of the most important parts of the whole build. You get a clear look at how the door will open and close, and even though the mechanism isn't complicated, it's doing a lot of work behind the scenes. This right here is going to make the whole chest feel interactive later, and once the cassette bots start popping in and out, these mechanisms are going to sell the whole thing. Now here's something that you don't see every day. It's called a sound brick, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a brick that plays sounds. It's going to bring Soundwave to life later on. It's cool that we finally get a Transformers set that can talk, and it's the guy who sounds like a broken speak-and spell. And if you know what a cassette player is, you will also get that reference. Next, I moved on to building the front panel that covers the cassette compartment. The Decepticon emblem gets centered near the top, almost like he's wearing it as a badge. Once his part's in place, you start to see his design come together, and it starts to feel like an actual tape deck. It swings open just like the real thing, giving you access to the inside, and even though we can open up his chest, he's still emotionally sealed shut. Moving on to the shoulders, we start to see some interesting mechanics along with these joints and a simple pin system. It's going to give his upper body that wider, more commanding look. When you build something like this and apply the stickers, you start noticing details that you've never really noticed before. And it's got me wondering what all these buttons do. Probably nothing, but they do look cool. The same goes for when we build out his forearms. We have some more interesting details and more panels where we wonder just what's going on here. But they do give him that retro tech look, and he does need to transform into 80s technology after all. It's also starting to look like something pulled straight out of an old cartoon. And every cartoon had those lights and buttons that did absolutely nothing. The hands snap on in just a couple steps, but they're sculpted in a way that gives them a surprising amount of personality. And once the arms go on, you get full articulation at the shoulder, and it holds tight without feeling fragile. It's the first time in this build that Soundwave looks like he's ready to do something. We're getting into the legs now, starting with the frame, and it's an interesting part of the build. This part's all about lining everything up so it stays sturdy later. And even though it's just a blocky skeleton for now, you can already tell where it's going. I think it goes without saying, but without a frame, he won't really have a leg to stand on. Just like my sense of humor. As I move on to applying these stickers, the whole thing is starting to make sense. These little details are what help sell the whole illusion because, yeah, this guy turns into a cassette player. That might not sound impressive today, but back in the 80s, that was peak technology. Even so, the other robots were cars, jets, and tanks, and this guy was basically the equivalent of the audio recording app on your phone. Intimidating? Not really, but practical if you're trying to spy on people in a Radio Shack, which is where we went to go buy peak technology, after we hunted and ran away from dinosaurs. In order to transform, he's going to need some mechanisms inside his leg, so it was time to build those out. You can really see how much thought went into the mechanics at this point. The way everything fits to support movement and transformation is pretty slick. As each piece goes in, you can see how it was planned out so the joints would work both in robot mode and when folded up. It's a smart balance of function and stability, and even though it's early, it's already laying the groundwork for some satisfying articulation later. As I continue the front of the legs, there's more sticker panels that mimic all those lights and buttons that we would expect. And they're pretty easy to miss if you're not looking closely. Then I had to add these yellow vent pieces, which I never really noticed in the original design, but they bring a pop of color that actually fits. It's a small thing, but it adds to the model's accuracy. After that, I drop in some more of the internal frame parts, and these are all about setting up the movement for later. Not fancy, but essential. This is one of those moments when you realize just how good LEGO engineering can be. Next, I snapped in the outer plates, and the parts come together in a way that feel very purposeful. You can already start to see how the transformation will work. Hinges, panels, sections that fold into each other. It all lines up in a way that makes Soundwave feel like he's already mid-transformation. Kinda like he's ready to transform at any time, mostly into a display piece that you'll probably never touch again. And you know what? That's okay. As the legs go on, unfortunately for our little friend, he's stuck doing the splits. Thankfully, I was able to stand him up, but the emotional damage had already been done. You know, building a robot's feet isn't really glamorous. Nobody ever says, wow, check out those robot feet. But they are pretty important. Without them, he would just kinda lay there. And he wouldn't be much use in a robot intergalactic battle. Once they're on though, they do look pretty cool, and now he has the stability he needs to carry out the job. It was time to add his battery compartment. It doesn't do anything, but it was crucial because this was the core of pretty much every toy from the 1980s. As I assembled the helmet, I was given a choice of either yellow or red visors. I'm gonna go with red for now. I like the contrast, and it gives him a sharper look and kind of makes it feel like he's always scanning for threats. Or perhaps judging my build quality, very quietly from across the room. Like someone who thinks that acceptable is a compliment, which I suppose at the end of the day is better than nothing. I have certainly heard a lot worse. As I put together the shoulder cannon, it's mostly made up of a few small parts stacked together. It's going to connect above his shoulder and should stay pretty snug once it's in. Soundwave has pretty much always had this thing. Even if it wasn't doing too much, it added to his whole vibe like he meant business. And at this point, after so many decades, it's something that you just expect to see on him. Building the blaster does raise a fair question. Why does a guy with a giant cannon bolted to his shoulder also need a handheld blaster? It's one of those very 80s design decisions where more weapons just meant more cool. And it totally feels like something a 4-year-old would pitch. Okay, so he's got a laser on his shoulder, and also a laser in his hand, and maybe rockets in his knees. That actually would have been kinda cool. As I give a shout out to the members that make builds like this possible, let's talk about something a little unexpected. Soundwave's voice in the original cartoon was created using a vocoder, basically a way to make human speech sound robotic. But the crazy part is that the same voice actor also played Megatron. So yeah, the guy basically argued with himself for a few seasons. And here I am struggling to hold a conversation with myself. But enough of the history lesson, it's time to see what Soundwave looks like as a cassette recorder. This is where it doesn't feel like a Lego set anymore, it's more like an action figure. It takes me back to being younger. A time before the internet, where if you had a question and didn't have an encyclopedia, you would just never know the answer. Like, that's it. But with that, it was time to bundle everything together: the cassette, the blaster, the shoulder cannon. It's all here. We started with bags of bricks and we ended up with a Decepticon. And it was at this point that I decided that the build was indeed perfect. Thanks again to all of my members for supporting the channel. I hope you enjoyed the build, and I will catch you in the next one.